I raised my son to be a good man. I thought I had. But as I stood on my balcony, watching the moving truck pull away from the beachfront condo I owned, the condo my son and his wife were being forced to leave, I had to ask myself where it all went wrong. It started with a trip to Hawaii, a 5-star, all-expenses-paid trip I booked to honor my late husband, a trip my daughter-in-law thanked me for by kicking me off of it. She thought she was getting a free vacation. She had no idea she was throwing away a $2 million lifeline. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The Florida sun was brilliant that Saturday morning, streaming into the condo and glinting off the crystal-clear glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the kind of perfect Naples morning my late husband, David, and I had dreamed of when we bought this place. Now, my son Leo and his wife, Amber, were living that dream, albeit for the symbolic price of $500 a month. I'd arrived just after 9 o'clock in the morning, carrying a bag of fresh pastries from my favorite local bakery and a small gift-wrapped box for Amber. "Judith, good morning," Amber said, opening the door. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She took the pastries with a polite but cool, "You shouldn't have." "It's no trouble at all, dear," I replied, stepping into the immaculate living room. The decor was modern, minimalist, and mostly paid for by me. "Where's Leo?" "In the office," she said, gesturing vaguely towards a closed door. "He's been on his phone all morning, work stuff." I nodded, though a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Leo had been tense for months. I made my way to the kitchen to make us some coffee, my eyes scanning the space. It was a beautiful apartment with a panoramic view of the Gulf of Mexico. "You know," I began casually, leaning against the marble countertop, "the condo 2 floors up just went on the market for rent. They're asking $3,500 a month. Can you believe it? And it doesn't even have the updated kitchen you two have." Amber's smile tightened. "Wow, that's crazy." Her tone was clipped. I knew she heard the unspoken message. You are living a $3,500 lifestyle for the price of a cheap car payment. It wasn't meant to be a jab, but a gentle reminder of the reality they were insulated from. A reality I had provided. Leo finally emerged from the office, his face pale. He ran a hand through his hair, forcing a smile when he saw me. "Mom, hey, I didn't hear you come in." "I brought pastries," I said warmly, holding up the bag. He hugged me, but it felt distracted, his eyes darting towards his phone, which he quickly slipped into his pocket. But I was a real estate broker for 40 years. I noticed details. I'd seen the screen for a split second. A text message notification. The preview line containing the words "overdue" and "final notice." My heart sank. But I kept my expression serene. This was not the time. "And this is for you, Amber," I said, handing her the small box. She opened it to reveal a delicate pearl bracelet. It was a classic, elegant piece. "Oh, it's lovely, Judith." "Thank you," she said, her voice flat. She placed it on the counter without trying it on. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. It was another gift she felt entitled to, another piece of generosity she didn't truly appreciate. We sat on the balcony, the warm sea breeze washing over us. The conversation was stilted, full of awkward silences. I talked about my week, my friends from the golf club. They offered one-word answers. Leo's phone buzzed in his pocket, and the phantom vibration seemed to make him jump every time. Amber stared out at the ocean, a look of discontent on her face, as if even this $1 million view wasn't good enough for her. The perfect picture of a happy family was just that, a picture, a facade, and I was beginning to see the cracks. The following week, I decided it was time to put a little warmth back into our cooling family dynamic. I invited Leo and Amber over to my house for dinner. My home, unlike their sleek modern condo, was filled with the comfortable warmth of memories. Photos of David were on every mantelpiece. His favorite leather armchair still sat by the fireplace, and the scent of the gardenias he'd planted still drifted in through the open windows. This house was a testament to a 45-year marriage built on love and mutual respect, something I was beginning to fear my son knew nothing about. I'd prepared David's favorite meal, roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes and a simple green salad. As we sat at the large mahogany dining table, I let the conversation flow gently, asking about their work, their friends, the mundane details of their lives. Leo seemed more relaxed here, away from the sterile environment of the condo. Amber, however, was quiet, picking at her food, offering little. She looked around the room as if she were a tourist in a museum, detached and unimpressed. After dinner, I served coffee in the living room. I let the silence settle for a moment before reaching for a thick, glossy envelope on the coffee table. "So," I began, my voice clear and steady, "I have something for you." I handed the envelope to Leo. He looked at me, puzzled, before opening it. Inside were 3 first-class tickets to Maui, Hawaii, and a reservation confirmation for a 2-bedroom oceanfront suite at a 5-star resort. His eyes widened. "Mom, what is this?" he breathed, pulling out the documents. "It's a gift," I said softly. "Next month would have been your father's and my 46th wedding anniversary. He always wanted to take me back to Hawaii, to the place we spent our honeymoon. I thought it would be nice if the 3 of us went together, to celebrate him, to make some new memories as a family." Leo was speechless. A genuine, unburdened smile finally spread across his face. "Mom, this is incredible. Thank you. I don't know what to say." He looked genuinely happy, and for a moment, the worry lines on his forehead disappeared. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was all they needed. A break, a chance to reconnect. Then I looked at Amber. She was staring at the itinerary Leo had placed on the table. There was no joy in her expression, no excitement, not even a flicker of gratitude. Her face was a mask of cool indifference, but I could see a subtle tightening around her jaw. She didn't say a word. "Amber, isn't this amazing?" Leo prompted, his own excitement faltering slightly as he noticed her reaction. "It's a very generous thought, Judith," she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It was the kind of polite dismissal you'd give to a stranger offering you a flyer on the street. I pressed on, determined to break through her wall of ice. "I just want us to have a wonderful time together. No stress, just relaxing on the beach, enjoying each other's company. It's all taken care of." I made sure to emphasize the word together. Amber forced a tight smile. "Of course." I watched them closely. Leo's initial joy was already being overshadowed by his wife's palpable lack of enthusiasm. He kept glancing at her, a worried look returning to his eyes. She, on the other hand, refused to meet my gaze. She was already mentally checking out. She saw this trip not as a gift, not as a chance to honor the man whose legacy was funding her lifestyle, but as an obligation, a chore, a week-long performance of the happy, grateful daughter-in-law she so clearly had no interest in being. And in that moment, watching her, I felt the first cold premonition that my gift was about to be thrown back in my face. The phone call came 2 days later. I was in my garden, pruning David's prize-winning roses, when my cell phone rang. It was Amber. My heart gave a hopeful little flutter. Perhaps she'd had time to think and was calling to genuinely thank me. Perhaps she wanted to ask what she should pack. I was a fool. "Hi, Judith. Do you have a minute?" she asked it, Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she only used when she wanted something. Of course, Amber. Is everything all right? I asked, setting my gardening shears down. Oh yes, everything's fine. I was just thinking about the trip to Hawaii, she began, letting the sentence hang in the air. Yes? I prompted. There was a slight pause. Well, Leo and I were talking, and you know how much we appreciate the gesture. It's so generous of you. I'm glad you think so. I'm very much looking forward to it, I said, my voice even. Right. Well, here's the thing, she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. It's just having you there. It might feel a little, well, less like a real vacation, you know? A bit like we have to be on the whole time. It wouldn't be very relaxing for us, and it might not be very relaxing for you either. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. The sheer audacity of her words left me breathless. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the scent of roses suddenly cloying and artificial. She took my silence as an invitation to continue. So I had this idea, she went on, her voice gaining confidence. It's a bit of a long shot, but I was thinking, since the tickets are already paid for and everything, what if you didn't come? I remained silent. My shock was quickly crystallizing into a cold, hard anger. And, she continued, completely oblivious, I was thinking, since my parents have never been to Hawaii, and they've had such a tough year, maybe they could use your ticket instead. It would mean the world to them, and that way the ticket wouldn't go to waste. It's a win-win, really. A win-win. She had the gall to call it a win-win. She wanted to take the trip I had planned to honor my dead husband, on my dime, and replace me with her own parents. The disrespect was so profound, so utterly staggering, that it almost felt unreal. It was like a scene from a bad movie. My silence stretched on. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, probably waiting for me to gush about what a wonderfully thoughtful idea that was. I let the silence hang there, heavy and suffocating. Let her squirm in it. Judith? She finally asked, a hint of uncertainty creeping into her voice. Are you there? I took a slow, deliberate breath. When I finally spoke, my voice was devoid of all warmth. It was the voice I used to close difficult real estate deals, the voice that left no room for negotiation. I heard you, Amber, I said. Oh, good. So, what do you think? She asked bad, trying to sound cheerful. I looked at the beautiful, thorn-covered stem in my hand. I will have to think about your suggestion. I will be in touch. And without waiting for a reply, I ended the call. I stood motionless in my garden for a long time, the sun warming my face, but doing nothing to thaw the ice forming around my heart. The game had changed. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She just didn't know it yet. That evening, the storm that had been brewing in my heart began to gather over Naples. Dark, heavy clouds rolled in from the Gulf, and a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. It was fitting. I knew Amber would go straight to Leo, and I knew she would twist the narrative to her advantage. I could almost hear her now. I just presented it as an idea, Leo. A way for my parents to have a nice vacation. Your mom was totally fine with it. And I knew my son. I knew his spine was made of jelly when it came to his wife. Inside their condo, Amber was doing exactly that. She recounted the conversation to Leo, framing her outrageous demand as a reasonable, even considerate proposal. She breezed past the part where she told me my presence would be a burden, focusing instead on the wonderful opportunity for her parents. Isn't that a great idea? She finished, looking at him expectantly. Leo stared at her, his face ashen. For once, he seemed to grasp the gravity of what she had done. Amber, you didn't. You didn't actually ask my mother to give up her ticket to your parents? Of course I did. And why not? She's been to Hawaii. My parents haven't. It's just sharing the wealth, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Sharing the wealth? It's her wealth. It's a trip to honor my father, my dead father. Amber, what were you thinking? His voice was rising, a rare occurrence. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Leo, she scoffed. It's not that deep. She's a strong woman. She'll understand. She probably appreciates my directness. Directness? That wasn't direct. That was monstrous. You just kicked my mom off a trip she planned and paid for in memory of her husband. Do you have any idea how that sounds? He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure panic. He knew. Deep down, he knew this was a fatal misstep. You're overreacting, Amber insisted, her voice turning hard. You always do this. You always take her side. I'm your wife. Are you going to back me up or not? And there it was, the ultimatum, the final manipulative twist of the knife. She was making this a test of his loyalty. Him versus me. Leo stopped pacing. The fight went out of him as quickly as it had appeared. I could picture him, shoulders slumped, the look of defeat on his face. He was trapped. Trapped by his secrets, by his debts, and by this woman who held all the power in their relationship. He was terrified of confronting her, terrified of the argument that would follow if he didn't capitulate. More than that, he was terrified of his own life unraveling if he upset the fragile balance he was barely maintaining. So he did what he always did. He chose the path of least resistance. He chose silence. Fine, he muttered, not looking at her. Just fine. His silence was his consent. His silence was his betrayal. He didn't stand up for his father's memory. He didn't stand up for me, his mother, the woman who was quietly keeping him afloat. He stood by and let his wife bulldoze over our family's history and my generosity. In that moment of weak, cowardly silence, Leo sealed their fate as surely as if he had made the demand himself. He had chosen his side, and it was the wrong one. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. I did not call them back. I did not text. I did not drive over to their condo to scream and rage, which is what Amber probably expected. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. What I felt was cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of ice. I was a businesswoman who had just seen a promising investment turn sour. It was time to cut my losses and divest. I spent the rest of the day in my home office. It's a room David had designed, with rich cherry wood bookshelves, a large desk overlooking the garden, and a quiet, calming energy. But there was nothing calm about my actions. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was strategizing. I didn't cancel the trip right away. That would have been too simple, too emotional. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to type. I pulled up the reservation for the flights and the hotel. With a few clicks, I saw the cancellation policy. I would get a full refund if I canceled within the next 24 hours. Plenty of time. Then, I opened my email. I composed a new message, addressing it to both Leo and Amber. The subject line was simple: Hawaii trip. The body of the email was even simpler. I wrote, Dear Amber and Leo, I have thought about your suggestion, Amber. I've decided the best course of action is to cancel the trip entirely. This will ensure everyone is comfortable and free from any obligations. I hope you have a pleasant evening. Sincerely, Mom. I read it over twice. It was perfect. It was polite, detached, and utterly dismissive. It offered no room for argument. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply removing the source of the problem, just as they had wanted. The phrase free from any obligations was a deliberate, pointed barb. You don't want the obligation of spending time with me? Fine. You are now free. I hit send. The immediate aftermath, I imagined, would be a mix of emotions in their condo. Amber would likely feel a flash of triumph. She had gotten her way. She no longer had to go on a forced family vacation. She wouldn't see the bigger picture, the true cost of her victory. She was playing checkers, while I was playing chess. Leo, on the other hand, would feel a cold dread creep up his spine. He would understand the tone of that email. He would recognize the finality in my words. He would know that this wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a business decision. He would feel the ground beneath his feet begin to shift. The storm hadn't hit yet, but he would hear the thunder. He would know that my quiet, calm response was infinitely more terrifying than any shouting match could ever be. I closed my laptop and walked out to the balcony. The earlier storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool. The first stars were beginning to appear in the twilight sky. I had made my first move. The trip was canceled, yes, but that was just a symptom. The disease was their entitlement, their disrespect, their ingratitude, and I was about to perform a surgery. It would be painful, precise, and absolutely necessary. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since David passed away. The grief was still there, a constant, low hum beneath the surface. But now it was overlaid with the sharp, clear focus of a CEO executing a hostile takeover. My target wasn't a corporation. It was my own asset, a $2 million property that was being occupied by ungrateful tenants. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy blue suit, pearl earrings, and low heels. This was my uniform, the armor I wore for 40 years in the cutthroat world of high-end real estate. Today, I was not a mother. I was Judith Barlow, broker and investor. I had a 10 o'clock in the morning appointment with my lawyer, a sharp man named Mr. Davies, whom I had on retainer. His office was downtown, in a sleek high-rise building that overlooked the bay. As I sat in his plush leather chair, I didn't waste time with pleasantries or family drama. Mr. Davies was my lawyer, not my therapist. I did not mention my son, my daughter-in-law, or a canceled trip to Hawaii. I spoke to him as one professional to another. "Good morning, Robert," I began, placing my leather portfolio on his polished desk. "I need you to draft some paperwork for me regarding one of my properties." "Of course, Judith. Which one?" he asked, pulling a legal pad towards him. "The condo on Gulf Shore Boulevard, Unit 703, I said, my voice even and calm. "Ah, the one your son is in," he said with a knowing smile. "It's the one currently occupied by tenants whose lease is about to expire," I corrected him gently but firmly. The distinction was crucial. This was no longer about family. It was about landlord and tenant. "I need you to draw up a new lease agreement for that property." "Certainly. What are the new terms?" he asked, pen poised. "The new monthly rent will be $3,500, I stated without a flicker of emotion. Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow slightly but made no comment. He was too professional for that. He simply wrote it down. $3,500. And the effective date? "The new lease will take effect in 60 days, as required by Florida law. I want the notice delivered by a licensed process server. I want everything done completely by the book. No loopholes, no wiggle room." "Understood," he said, scribbling notes. "We'll include the standard clauses: late fees, security deposit, maintenance responsibilities. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, leaning forward slightly. I want a clause that explicitly states the lease will not be renewed upon its expiration in 12 months. I am giving them a 1-year non-renewable lease. I have other plans for the property after that." Now he looked up. His professional curiosity piqued. "You're planning to sell?" "I am planning to liquidate the asset," I replied, using the cold, impersonal language of finance. He nodded slowly, understanding the full picture. This wasn't just a rent increase. It was an eviction notice, delivered 12 months in advance. It was a perfectly legal, ironclad strategy to reclaim my property. We spent another 30 minutes going over the details. I was meticulous, ensuring every I was dotted and every T was crossed. As I left his office, I felt no sense of triumph, no vindictive glee. I felt a quiet, resolute calm. I was simply protecting my investment. I had given my son and his wife a life of incredible privilege in a home I owned. They had mistaken my generosity for a guarantee. They had forgotten that the hand that gives can also take away. The legal notice Mr. Davies was drafting was not a punishment. It was a market correction, and the market was about to come crashing down on them. 3 days later, the papers were ready. A licensed process server, a burly man with an impassive face, was dispatched to the condo. He was instructed to deliver the documents directly into the hands of either Leo or Amber Barlow. It was 5:30 in the evening, a time I knew they would both be home from work. Leo was the one who answered the door. He was probably expecting a pizza delivery or a package from Amazon. Instead, he was met with the grim face of the process server. "Are you Leo Barlow?" the man asked, his voice a monotone rumble. "Yes," Leo answered, confused. "You've been served," the man said, thrusting a thick manila envelope into Leo's hands. He then turned and walked away without another word. Leo stood in the doorway, dumbfounded. "Served?" The word hung in the air, heavy with legal dread. He closed the door slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the official-looking envelope. Amber came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Who was that?" she asked. I don't know. Some guy. He said I've been served," Leo stammered, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Served with what? Are you in some kind of trouble?" she asked, a flicker of annoyance in her voice. He tore open the envelope, his hands clumsy. He pulled out a sheaf of papers. The top page was a cover letter from the law offices of Davies and Finch. Below it was a formal, multi-page document. He scanned the first page, his face growing paler with every word. "What is it?" Amber demanded, snatching the papers from his hand. She read the heading aloud. "Notice of lease modification and rent increase." Her voice was full of disbelief. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the dense legal text until they landed on the numbers. Her breath hitched. $3,500, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "A month? Is this a joke?" Tucked inside the lease agreement was a single smaller piece of paper. It was a piece of my personal stationery, thick cream-colored cardstock. On it, I had written a short, simple note in my neatest cursive. Leo picked it up and read it aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "An independent lifestyle comes with independent expenses. You have 2 months to decide if you can afford it." The reality of the situation crashed down on them. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated, and legally binding move. Amber's disbelief curdled into rage. "She can't do this! The nerve of that woman! This is because of the trip, isn't it? She's doing this to be petty and cruel. This is revenge." Leo didn't say anything. He just sank onto the sofa, the legal documents scattered on the floor around him. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. He knew this wasn't about being petty. He knew my note wasn't just a snide remark. It was a declaration. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could not afford it. The $500 rent was the only thing keeping his head above the deep, dark water of his debt, and his mother had just taken away his life raft. The letter in his hands wasn't just a rent increase. It was his eviction notice. It was his financial death sentence. They arrived at my house less than an hour later. I heard their car screech to a halt in my driveway, and the sound of 2 doors slamming shut. I was waiting for them. I was sitting in David's armchair by the fireplace, a cup of chamomile tea steaming gently on the table beside me. I was the picture of calm. The doorbell rang, a long, insistent peal followed by furious pounding. I took a slow sip of my tea before walking to the door and opening it. They stood there, Amber's face flushed with rage, Leo's pale with desperation. Amber pushed past me into the foyer, waving the legal papers in her hand. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet house. "How could you do this to us? To your own son?" "Hello, Amber." "Leo," I said calmly, closing the door behind them. "I see you received the new lease agreement." "New lease agreement? This is an eviction notice," she yelled. $3,500. That's insane. You're doing this to punish us because I didn't want to go on your stupid trip. "This has nothing to do with punishment," I replied, my voice level. I walked back to my armchair and sat down, gesturing for them to take the sofa opposite me. They remained standing, vibrating with anger and panic. "This is business. The property is an asset, and it needs to generate income at the current market rate. Your previous lease, with its heavily subsidized rate, has expired. These are the terms of the new one." "Business? We're your family," Leo finally choked out, his voice cracking. "Mom, please. You can't do this. We can't afford this. You know we can't." He was pleading now, his eyes begging me for mercy. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment for him to be a man, to be honest. But he wasn't there yet. "Can't you, Leo?" I asked simple, softly, looking him directly in the eye. "You both have good jobs. You live in a multi-million-dollar condo for $500 a month. You don't have a car payment. Because I bought you that SUV as a wedding gift. Your expenses are remarkably low. Why can't you afford it?" My question hung in the air, a direct challenge to the web of lies he had been spinning. Amber, of course, jumped in to defend him. "It's none of your business what we can or can't afford. You're just being a cruel, vindictive old woman." I ignored her completely. My focus was entirely on my son. "Tell me, Leo. Tell me why you can't afford to pay the market rate for your life." He faltered, his gaze dropping to the floor. He couldn't tell me the truth. Not in front of her. He couldn't admit to the secret debt that was strangling him. "We just can't," he mumbled, his voice thick with shame. I took another sip of my tea. "Then you have a decision to make," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "The terms are on the paper. This is not a negotiation. You are not my children in this matter. You are my tenants. You have the right to accept the new lease, or you have the right to decline it and vacate the property within 60 days. The choice is yours." My calmness was a wall they couldn't breach. They had come expecting a screaming match, a dramatic, emotional fight where they could use guilt and sentiment as weapons. Instead, they found a boardroom. I had stripped all emotion from the equation, leaving them with nothing but the cold, hard facts of contract law. They stared at me, their anger and desperation useless against my icy composure. The fiery confrontation they had started had been extinguished by a single, unmovable force: my resolve. The confrontation ended with Amber storming out of the house, dragging a shell-shocked Leo behind her. I knew, however, that it wasn't over. The foundation of their life had cracked, and the pressure I was applying was only going to get stronger. I gave it 2 days. He came back on a Tuesday night, just after 10 o'clock. It was raining, a steady, miserable drizzle that matched the mood perfectly. He didn't pound on the door this time. He rang the bell once, a short, hesitant sound. He was alone. When I opened the door, he looked like a ghost. His face was haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. He was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with the eyes of a lost little boy. "Come in, Leo," I said softly, stepping aside. He walked into the foyer, dripping water onto the marble floor. He didn't seem to notice. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. I led him into the living room, the same room where the fight had happened just days before. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa. He collapsed into it, burying his face in his hands. A sound escaped him, a ragged, choked sob. He stayed like that for a full minute, his body shaking. I waited patiently, giving him the space to let it out. I didn't offer comfort. This was a pain he needed to feel, a rock bottom he needed to hit. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and full of tears. "I'm in trouble, Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm in so much trouble." I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. "Tell me." And then it all came pouring out. The dam of his lies and secrets finally broke. He confessed everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and desperation. He told me about the bad investment he'd made 2 years ago, a tech startup that had gone bankrupt, leaving him with a secret business loan he couldn't pay. He told me how the debt had snowballed with interest and penalties, growing into a monstrous sum that haunted his every waking moment. "How much, Leo?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. He flinched, unable to meet my eyes. Almost $200,000, he mumbled. $200,000. The number settled in the air between us, heavy and obscene. He told me about the threatening letters, the constant calls from creditors, the lies he had to tell Amber to hide the missing money from their accounts. He admitted that the $500 rent wasn't just a help. It was the only thing that had allowed him to keep up the facade, to keep from drowning completely. "I was going to tell you," he sobbed, looking at me with raw desperation. "I swear I was, but I was so ashamed. And then Amber, she just wants so much. She wants the lifestyle, the nice things. I couldn't let her down." He finally broke down completely, his words dissolving into incoherent sobs. He was a 35-year-old man, crying like a child in his mother's living room. It was a pathetic sight, but it was also the most honest I had seen him be in years. He had been backed into a corner with no way out. The weight of his lies had become too heavy to bear. He wasn't confessing out of a newfound sense of integrity. He was confessing because he was desperate. He was confessing because he had finally realized that I was his only hope for salvation, and he was about to find out just how badly he had misplayed his hand. I let him cry for a few more minutes, the sound echoing in the quiet room. When his sobs subsided into ragged breaths, I finally spoke. My voice was not angry, nor was it sympathetic. It was the calm, factual voice of a narrator stating the final, unchangeable truth. "I know, Leo," I said. He looked up, his tear-streaked face a mask of confusion. "What? What do you know?" "I've known about the debt for 6 months," I stated simply. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking even more ghostly than before. "How?" he whispered. "You're my son, Leo. I notice things. The tension, the constant checking of your phone, the way you flinch when a number you don't recognize calls. And frankly, your financial footprint is not that hard to follow when one knows where to look. I hired a private financial investigator. I know everything. The failed startup, the loan from that predatory lender, the exact amount you owe, down to the penny." He was speechless, utterly floored. He looked like I had physically struck him. "The trip to Hawaii," I continued, my voice still level, "was not just a trip. It was a test. A final test for you and for your wife." I leaned forward, placing my cards on the table, one by one. "I am selling the condo, Leo. I have a buyer. The deal closes in 75 days. The sale price is $2 million. He gasped, a small, choked sound. "My plan, Plan A, was this. The three of us would go to Hawaii. We would honor your father. If Amber had shown 1 ounce of grace, 1 shred of gratitude or respect, if you had shown the courage to be a husband and manage your wife's appalling behavior, I was going to give you $500,000 from the sale of the condo." His eyes widened in disbelief, a dawning horror spreading across his features as he began to understand. $500,000, I repeated, letting the numbers sink in. "Enough to pay off your entire $200,000 debt. Enough to put a very generous down payment on a nice, modest home of your own. Enough to give you a fresh start. A clean slate. That was the gift I was planning to give you. That was your lifeline." I paused, letting the full weight of what he had lost settle upon him. "But you didn't pass the test," I said, my voice turning cold. "Your wife failed spectacularly, with a display of greed and disrespect so profound it was almost comical. And you failed by letting her do it. Your silence was your endorsement. You stood by and allowed her to spit on your father's memory and my generosity. So you closed that door. You and Amber, you slammed it shut and locked it yourselves, which left me with Plan B." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street. "Plan B is what is happening now. It is the business plan. I am reclaiming my $2 million asset in a clean, legal, and unimpeachable way. The rent increase is not a punishment, Leo. It is a tool. It is the legal mechanism by which I ensure you vacate my property so I can deliver it, empty and clean, to its new owner. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." He just sat there, utterly broken. The truth of it all, the money, the lost opportunity, the sheer scale of his failure, had crushed him. He hadn't just lost a subsidized apartment. He and his wife, in their greed and entitlement, had actively, single-handedly thrown away a fortune. They had destroyed their own salvation, and there was nothing left to say. Leo drove home in a daze, the rain on the windshield blurring the world outside into a meaningless smear of light and color. The truth I had laid bare was replaying in his mind on a loop. $2 million, $500,000, a test, a failure. Each repetition was another turn of the knife. When he walked into the condo, Amber was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a look of sullen anger still etched on her face. "Well?" she demanded without looking up. "Did you convince her? Is she going to stop this ridiculous nonsense?" Leo didn't answer. He just stood in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto their expensive rug, the one I had paid for. "Leo, did you hear me?" she asked, finally lowering her phone and looking at him. She saw his expression, the vacant, shattered look in his eyes, and her own face hardened. "Oh, don't tell me you just sat there and cried. You didn't fix it?" "There's nothing to fix," he said, his voice hollow. "It's over." "What do you mean it's over? She can't just kick us out." "She can," he said. "And she is. She's selling the condo." Amber shot up from the sofa. "She's what? She can't sell it. This is our home." "No, it's not," Leo said, a strange, bitter laugh escaping his lips. "That's the whole point, isn't it? It was never our home. It was always hers. We were just living in it." And then he told her everything. He told her about the $2 million sale price. He told her about the $500,000 gift that was supposed to be theirs. He told her the Hawaii trip was a final test of character, a test she had failed in the most spectacular way possible. Amber stared at him, her face a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, confusion, and then a slow, dawning comprehension. The number hung in the air between them, shimmering like a mirage. $500,000. 500,000? She repeated, the words barely a whisper. We lost $500,000? Yes, Leo said, his voice flat. Because you just had to have your parents come to Hawaii. Because you couldn't stand the thought of spending a week with my mother. You threw it all away. The dam of his resentment, built up over years of her demands and his own cowardice, finally burst. For the first time, the argument wasn't about me. It was about them. "Me?" she shrieked, her voice rising hysterically. "This is my fault? What about you? What about the $200,000 in debt you've been hiding from me?" He told her that part too. The final, devastating secret. "You lied to me!" Amber screamed, her face contorted with fury and betrayal. "For years, we're broke because of you. We're losing everything because of you. And we could have been saved," he yelled back, his voice finally raw with the agony he'd been suppressing. "We could have been free of all of it. But your greed, your endless, bottomless greed ruined it. All you had to do was be a decent human being for 1 week, and you couldn't even manage that." The fight was ugly, vicious, and raw. All the unspoken truths, all the hidden resentments, all the financial pressures and secret shames came pouring out. It was a hurricane of blame and regret, tearing their carefully constructed life apart at the seams. She threw his lies and weakness in his face. He threw her entitlement and ingratitude back at her. They were no longer a team. They were two desperate people, trapped in the wreckage of their own mistakes, turning on each other because there was no one else to blame. The perfect picture had shattered, and all that was left were the jagged, ugly pieces. They hadn't just lost a home and a fortune. In that moment, screaming at each other in the beautiful borrowed condo they were about to lose, they lost each other too. The 60 days passed in a blur of bitter silence and frantic packing. The legal notice was unassailable, and the reality of their situation was absolute. They couldn't afford the new rent, and there was no appeal, no negotiation. The date on the notice was a deadline, and it arrived with the unpitying certainty of a sunrise. On the final day, I stood on the balcony of my own home, which was just a few buildings down the coast from theirs. I could see the moving truck parked outside the condo, a stark, ugly symbol of their failure. It was a hot, humid Florida day, the air thick and still. Through my binoculars, I could see them, Leo and Amber, moving like ghosts in and out of the building. They looked exhausted, defeated, and a decade older. They didn't speak to each other. They moved in separate orbits of misery, carrying boxes filled with the remnants of a life they had taken for granted. The expensive furniture, the designer clothes, the high-end electronics, all of it now just cumbersome baggage on their way to a much smaller, much harsher reality. They had found a small, cramped apartment to rent, miles from the beach, miles from the life they thought they deserved. My phone rang. It was the real estate agent representing the buyer. "Judith," he said, his voice cheerful. "Just wanted to let you know, the final walkthrough is complete. The tenants are out. The place is clean. We are cleared to close tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be there." I hung up the phone and lowered the binoculars. I watched as Leo carried the last box to the truck. Amber stood by the open passenger door, not helping, just staring blankly at the building she had once called home. They got into the truck, and without a backward glance, they drove away. The $2 million transaction was complete. My asset was secure. My plan had been executed flawlessly. I had won. But as I stood there, watching the truck disappear down the boulevard, I felt no joy. There was no sense of victory, no satisfying taste of revenge. There was only a profound and hollow sadness. I had won the battle, but I had lost my son. Perhaps I had lost him long before this, to his own weakness and to the woman he had chosen to marry. But this was the final, undeniable confirmation. I had taught them a lesson, a brutal, expensive lesson about consequences, gratitude, and the real cost of an independent life. But the price of that lesson was a fractured family and a relationship that might never be repaired. I looked out at the calm, blue expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, the same view they had just lost forever. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. It was beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely and utterly alone. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.